All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Look, if you own property in Victoria and you've ever even daydreamed about renovating, adding an extension, or honestly just chucking a shed in the backyard, you've probably hit a local council website and immediately felt completely overwhelmed, right? It's like a minefield of red tape out there. But today, we're going to navigate that whole complex world of Victoria's building regulations together. By the time we wrap up, you're going to know exactly when you actually have to jump through those bureaucratic hoops, when you're legally totally in the clear to just grab your tools and get to work, and most importantly, how to kick off your next project with absolute confidence and zero stress. So, do you actually need a permit for that? It's literally the million-dollar question every single homeowner asks before swinging a hammer. And it sounds like it should be a straightforward yes or no, right? But getting it wrong, that can cost you dearly. We're talking massive fines, legal fees, or worst-case scenario, being forced to tear down the exact thing you just paid to build. When we actually dug into the Victorian Building Authority's rules, the VBA, they are incredibly strict. But good news, they're not impossible to decode once you break them down. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the building permit baseline. Second, we'll break down the common exemptions. Third, we'll navigate those complex alterations. And finally, we'll look at a complete end-to-end solution. All right, Section 1, the building permit baseline. Let's look at the actual rules for building. Now, what's wild here is how incredibly broad the legal definition of constructing actually is. According to the VBA, it doesn't just mean building a brand new house from scratch. Oh no. It means to build, rebuild, erect, repair, make alterations, enlarge, or even just relocate a building on your own land. Basically, the default position in Victoria is that almost any physical work you do to a structure on your property is going to trigger the rules. Unless it specifically falls under an exemption, you are almost always going to need a building permit. And listen, skipping the paperwork, it's not some clever DIY shortcut, it's a massive financial risk. If you end up violating Sections 16 and 16B of the Building Act of 1993, the penalties are absolutely staggering. Carrying out unauthorized or unregistered major domestic building work, that can hit you with 120 penalty units. In the real world, that translates to thousands and thousands of dollars in fines. And they'll tack on another 60 penalty units just for entering into major contracts without proper registration. Not to mention, local councils can just slap you with an immediate stop work order. It's just not worth the risk to guess whether your project needs approval. Moving on to Section 2, Common Exemptions Explained. Let's talk about when you're actually in the clear. So say you're planning to put up a typical backyard shed, a carport, or maybe a private garage, what the VBA officially calls Class 10A freestanding buildings. You actually can avoid a permit for these, but, and this is a big but, only if you stay strictly within some very exact parameters. First off, it can't be bigger than 10 square meters in floor area. The overall height is strictly capped at 3 meters. And get this, if you're putting it within a meter of your property line, that height limit drops down to 2.4 meters. Also, it absolutely cannot be constructed of masonry, like brick or stone. If your planned shed pushes past even one of these metrics, like let's say it's 11 square meters, boom, you're instantly back in permit territory. Now, what about tearing stuff down? Well, the magic number to remember here is 40. You can actually demolish a freestanding, non-masonry structure, think an old timber shed or beat-up carport, totally permit-free as long as its floor area is under 40 square meters. Naturally, it can't pose a danger to the public or the people living there, and obviously, don't try tearing down something on the Heritage Register. But still, that 40 square meter rule gives you a solid amount of breathing room to clear out those old backyard eyesores yourself without filling out a single piece of paperwork. But you gotta watch out for a couple of really common trip-ups, specifically when we're talking about retaining walls and swimming pools. For a retaining wall to be exempt, it has to be less than 1 meter high, and it can't be associated with protecting the property next door. As for pools, setting up one of those fully relocatable pools with its safety barrier is totally fine without a permit. But the exact second that swimming pool or spa becomes a permanent fixture in your yard, you are 100% going to need a building permit. No exceptions. All right, Section 3, Navigating Complex Alterations. This is where DIY projects can escalate fast. So we found a real gray area here that trips so many people up. The line between basic repair and maintenance versus a full replacement. Look, swapping out a couple of rotten weatherboards, retiling a bathroom, or replacing a few cracked roof tiles using the exact same materials, that's generally exempt, assuming you aren't messing with the structural bones of the house. But a full replacement? That is a completely different beast. If you're underpinning footings, changing the total floor area, or replacing any load-bearing structural support, the VBA treats that as an alteration, and you absolutely need a permit. And here is a classic example that catches almost everyone completely off guard: solar panels. You'd think just slapping a few energy-saving panels on the roof would be a quick, straightforward job, right? Well, the installation of rooftop solar panels is officially classified as an alteration to an existing building. Why? Because bolting those things down adds new wind loads and structural stress to your roof framing. And because of that added stress, you often have to get the support structure assessed by a registered civil engineer before you can even think about installing them. And because of these super strict rules around structural soundness and safety, getting a complex alteration done means you suddenly might need a small army of specialized engineers to sign off on your plans. Depending on what you're doing, you might need a civil engineer for the structural stuff, a mechanical engineer for hydraulics, an electrical engineer, maybe even a fire safety engineer. Trying to juggle all these different certificates, from mechanical to fire safety, just to get one single building permit approved, it can quickly turn into an absolute nightmare for a homeowner trying to manage the whole project themselves.
Which brings us to Section 4, your end-to-end solution. How to get zero-stress execution.
And this is exactly where Alert Construction enters the picture. They're a Melbourne-based building clinic, and they're essentially designed to be your ultimate stress-free partner in all this. Instead of you spending your weekends trying to figure out if your retaining wall needs a permit or frantically Googling to find a civil engineer to approve your roof load, they operate as a centralized hub. They already know exactly how to navigate this entire bureaucratic maze for you. What really makes their approach a game changer is their integrated workflow. Think about how it usually goes. You hire a draftsman, then you hunt down an engineer, then you finding a building surveyor for the permit, and then, finally, you try to find a builder who can actually do the work. It's exhausting. But Alert Construction, they handle that entire timeline right under one roof. They start with the design and architecture, pass it seamlessly to their in-house engineers for structural assessments, handle all that complicated VBA paperwork to get your permits, and then they physically execute the build themselves. And because they're armed with an absolutely unlimited builder license, their expertise scales to exactly what you need. It doesn't matter if you're tackling a complex bathroom or balcony renovation, adding a massive house extension that needs tricky structural modifications, or even just building a completely brand new home from the ground up. They literally have the legal authority and the technical chops to manage the whole shebang seamlessly from day one. Plus, because they have their own dedicated engineering division, called Alert Engineers, you aren't dealing with those massive delays waiting on third-party structural assessments. Remember that load certification for the solar panels we talked about? They do it in-house. Need a structural assessment to remove a wall? In-house. It perfectly solves that whole Section 238 certificate headache we mentioned earlier. It guarantees safety, ensures you're fully compliant with the National Construction Code, and honestly, it ends up being a much more efficient and cost-effective way to manage your build. So knowing just how complex Victoria's permit baseline really is, and seeing how steep those penalties are if you get it wrong, the real question becomes, why let the fear of bureaucracy stop you from building your dream space? When you've got an end-to-end clinic that's fully equipped to handle the legal maze for you, the only thing left for you to figure out is, what are you going to build next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you on the next one.